The Universal Library existed at the center of everything, not the center of the galaxy or even the center of the universe, but the center of all knowledge. It floated in a pocket of space where the laws of physics bent themselves into polite submission, and its crystal spires stretched upward for distances that made no sense to mortal minds. Every species that had ever achieved interstellar travel knew of it. Every species that valued wisdom made the pilgrimage at least once. Keeper had worked in the library for 12,000 years. They had seen wonders that would break lesser minds. They had the singing crystals from the outer rim of Andromeda. They had personally the classification of dark matter harmonics. They had spent 3 centuries in a debate about whether the frozen light from the hollow nebula counted as an element or an energy form. Nothing surprised them anymore. At least, nothing had surprised them until the humans arrived. The delegation from Earth came seeking access to the compendium of stellar formations. This was a routine request. Humanity had only been traveling between stars for about 500 years, which made them very young by galactic standards. Young species often came to the library looking for maps and charts and basic scientific knowledge. The archivists were happy to help. It was their purpose. As part of the standard intake process, biological samples were collected from all visitors. This was done for record-keeping, for the medical databases, and for the general advancement of knowledge. Tissue samples, breath condensate, neural fluid, and tears. Most species did not produce tears. Those that did usually produce them as a simple response to eye irritation or chemical imbalance. The samples were and filed away without much thought. Tears were tears. They were not interesting. The human samples changed everything. Was working in the analysis chamber when the automata began to malfunction. The small crystalline machines were designed to break down biological samples into their component parts and classify them according to the library's vast system of categories. They had been doing this work flawlessly for millions of years. But when they tried to process the human tear sample, they simply stopped. Then they rejected the sample. Then they tried again. Then they rejected it again. Watched this happen 17 times before they decided to investigate personally. They recalibrated the instruments by hand, checked every connection, and ran the analysis sequence again. The automata processed the sample. The readings appeared on the crystalline display. And who had not been surprised by anything in 3,000 years, felt their entire understanding of the universe shift beneath them like sand. The tear contained grief. Not the chemical markers associated with grief, not the hormonal signatures that indicated sadness. The emotion itself was encoded into the tear at the quantum level. It was woven into the very structure of the molecules. And it was not alone. Joy was layered beside the sorrow like sediment in ancient stone, love that had outlasted death, fear that had crystallized into something harder and more lasting, rage that had been transmuted into quiet resolve. The tear was not a byproduct of emotion. It was the emotion given physical form. Ran the analysis 12 more times. The results did not change. They summoned the high archivists. The Chamber of Elements was the most sacred space in the Universal Library. Its walls were made of crystalline material that could display any information in the library's vast databases. The floor was carved from a single piece of neutron star core, polished to a mirror shine. The high archivists gathered there only for matters of extreme importance. Projected their findings across the walls. The data glowed in colors that most species could not perceive. This cannot be classified as biological fluid, they reported. The emotional resonance persists independent of the organic matrix. When we isolated a single tear and removed all physical matter, the resonance remained. We are looking at something that exists between energy and meaning. High Archivist was the oldest of their order. They had lived for so long that they no longer remembered their original species. They studied the data in silence for a very long time. "You are proposing," said slowly, "that human tears are a new form of matter." I am proposing they may not be matter at all. I am proposing they are something the library has never encountered. They are physical manifestations of subjective experience that retain coherence outside the beings that produced them. The other high archivists murmured among themselves. This was unprecedented. In all the countless of the library's existence, new fundamental classifications had been added only a handful of times. Each edition had changed the way the galaxy understood reality. Who provided this sample? Asked. A human female, a diplomat named Dr. Sarah. She cried during the intake process. Why did she cry? Consulted their notes. She apologized for the tears. She said that the view of the library's spires reminded her of her late daughter, who had dreamed of seeing the stars. The chamber fell silent. Her daughter is dead, said. It was not a question. Yes, she died before humans achieved interstellar travel. She never saw the stars she dreamed of. Moved toward the containment field where the tear sample waited. The tiny droplet floated in a suspension of stabilized light. It seemed so small, so fragile, so insignificant. And yet, said quietly, the love remains. Nodded, the specific emotional frequency in that tear has been analyzed in detail. It contains the precise resonance of a mother's love for a child she will never hold again. The daughter is dead. Doctor will eventually die as well. But the love encoded in that tear shows no signs of decay. It is stable. It is eternal. Eternal, one of the younger archivists repeated. That word is not used lightly in this chamber. I use it deliberately, replied. We have stellar cores that will burn for trillions of years. We have classified energy forms that will persist until the heat death of the universe. This tear will outlast all of them. The physical matter may eventually degrade, but the emotional resonance is woven into the fabric of spacetime itself. It will exist for as long as existence exists. Turn back to face the assembled archivists. A classification tribunal must be convened. This must be investigated thoroughly. And the humans? Asked. They are still waiting in the outer halls. They believe this is a routine visit. Ask Doctor to remain. She should be informed of what her tears have caused. The others may go about their business. Bowed and left the chamber. In the outer halls, the human delegation sat on benches carved from crystal. They looked tired from their journey. Doctor sat slightly apart from the others. She was a middle-aged woman with gray in her hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. She was looking out one of the vast windows at the infinite spires of the library. She was thinking of her daughter. Could tell this because the emotional resonance lingered around her like perfume. Most species could not perceive such things, but the keepers of the library had been trained to sense the subtle patterns of consciousness. Doctor said, approaching her carefully, "May I speak with you privately?" She turned. Her eyes were dry now, but traces of recent tears still marked her cheeks. Of course. Is there a problem with our credentials? No, there is no problem with your credentials. Pause, trying to find the right words. Doctor, I must ask you about your tears. She blinked. My tears. The ones you shed during intake, when you looked at the library and thought of your daughter. Her face clouded with confusion. I apologize for that. It was unprofessional of me. The view just reminded me of her and I could not help myself. Please do not apologize, said gently. Doctor, your tears have done something extraordinary, something that has never happened in the entire history of this library. They led her toward the Chamber of Elements. Behind them, the other human delegates watched with puzzled expressions. None of them understood what was happening. None of them could have imagined that a single mother's grief might reshape the galaxy's understanding of existence itself. In the containment field, the tear continued to glow with the eternal light of a love that death could not diminish. The Universal Library had wonders beyond counting, but it had never anything quite like this. Word spread through the galactic scholarly networks faster than light could travel through normal space. Within a single standard year, the Universal Library had received over 4,000 requests from quantum philosophers and elemental theorists. They all wanted access to the human tier samples. They all wanted to study this impossible phenomenon. The requests were every single one. The High Archivists had convened a classification tribunal. This was an event that had not occurred in 600,000 years. The last time it happened, the library had been debating whether consciousness itself should be classified as an element. The debate had lasted for 8 centuries and had resulted in 3 separate wars among species who disagreed with the final verdict. This new tribunal promised to be even more controversial. Dr. Sarah had been asked to remain at the library. At first, she agreed out of diplomatic obligation. Humanity was still new to the galactic community, and she did not want to cause offense by refusing a request from such an important institution. But as she came to understand what her tears had caused, her reasons for staying changed. She became genuinely curious. "I do not understand why this is significant," she admitted during one of her many sessions with Keeper. They were sitting in a small study room overlooking one of the library's infinite gardens. Strange plants from 1,000 worlds grew in careful arrangements below them. Every human cries. We cry when we are sad. We cry when we are happy. We cry when we are angry. Bobbies cry when they are born. We cry at weddings and funerals, and sometimes just because a song reminds us of something we had forgotten. That said, is precisely what makes this significant. They moved to a display panel and called up a holographic chart. Hundreds of species appeared, each with detailed biological information. "We have 712 sentient species in this galaxy alone. 93 of them produce emotional secretions of some variety, but none of them produce tears that retain emotional coherence after separation from the body. Not one." Doctor frowned. "What does that mean, retain emotional coherence?" Considered how to explain. They had been thinking about this question for months, trying to find words that a human could understand. "When a weeps," they said finally, "their tears contain stress hormones, chemical indicators. The tears are a byproduct of emotion, the way smoke is a byproduct of fire. You can analyze the smoke and learn that something was burning, but the smoke is not the fire. It is just what the fire leaves behind." "I understand," Doctor said. "So you are saying that for other species, tears are just chemical traces of emotion." "Exactly, but your tears," gestured to a containment field on the nearby table. Inside it floated a new sample collected that very morning. "Your tears are not byproducts. They are the emotion itself, given physical form. The grief does not cause the tear. The grief becomes the tear." Doctor was quiet for a long moment. She stared at the containment field with an expression that could not quite read. Human faces were still difficult for them to interpret, despite months of practice. "My daughter Maya," she finally said, "used to collect things. Rocks mostly. She would find them on walks and bring them home. Every rock had a story," she said, "where it came from, what it had seen, how it got to where she found it." Her voice caught slightly, but she continued. "I thought it was just a child's game, a way of making the world more interesting." "It was not just a game," said gently. "Your daughter understood something fundamental about the universe. Everything carries the imprint of its history, but only human tears carry the full weight of meaning." Doctor looked up. "You are telling me that when I cry for her, I am making something like that, something that holds a story. Something that holds the story so completely that the story remains even when everything else is gone. Doctor, the tear you shed in our intake chamber still contains your love for Maya. It will contain that love until the end of the universe, perhaps longer." The woman wept again then. She did not try to hide it or apologize for it. The tears rolled down her cheeks freely and carefully collected them as they fell. Each one was a new, impossible artifact. Each one contained a universe of meaning. "Why us?" Doctor asked, wiping her eyes. "What makes humans different?" Had been pondering this question since the discovery. They had consulted with biologists, with quantum theorists, with philosophers of consciousness. Many theories had been proposed. "Your species evolved under conditions of extreme emotional stress," they said. "You developed in a world full of predators, full of danger. You faced constant threats and lost many of your kind. This shaped your emotional capacity." "Other species face danger too," Doctor pointed out. "Yes, but there is something else." Paused, choosing their words carefully. "You experience more distinct emotions in a single day than most species experience in a decade. Your emotional lives are incredibly complex. Joy and sorrow can exist simultaneously in a human heart. You can love someone and fear them at the same time. You can feel grief and gratitude together." "That is true," Doctor admitted. "I feel all of those things when I think of Maya. I miss her terribly, but I am also grateful for the time we had." "And there is one more thing," said, "perhaps the most important thing of all." "What is that?" "You have always known you were mortal. From the moment you can think, you understand that you will die. You understand that everyone you love will die. Every other sentient species we have encountered either discovered this truth gradually or found ways to extend their lives until death became distant and abstract. But humans live their entire lives in the shadow of death." Doctor nodded slowly. "We call it the human condition." "And yet you love anyway," said. "You form deep bonds with beings you know you will lose. You create families and friendships and communities, knowing that all of it is temporary. You give your hearts completely, despite knowing they will be broken." "What choice do we have?" Doctor asked. "The alternative is to love nothing, to feel nothing. That would be worse than loss." Felt something shift in their understanding. This was it. This was the answer they had been seeking. "Perhaps," they said slowly, "tears are what happens when a mortal species loves something enough to make it immortal. You cannot extend your lives. You cannot prevent death. But you can create something that death cannot touch. Something that carries your love beyond the boundaries of your brief existence." Doctor looked at the containment field again. The tear inside it glowed with soft, eternal light. "Maya would have loved this," she whispered. "She would have loved knowing that tears are just rocks, really, rocks with stories." Made a note to add this observation to the growing file on human emotional phenomena. Everything Doctor said seemed to contain new insights. Her perspective was invaluable. More human visitors began arriving at the library. Word had reached Earth about the discovery, though the details were still classified. Scientists came. Artists came. Ordinary people came, curious to see what all the fuss was about. Each one contributed samples. Tears of joy at reuniting with lost family members. Tears of heartbreak after ended love affairs. Tears of rage at injustice. Tears of wonder at the infinite library itself. The collection grew. Each sample was unique. Each sample was eternal. And in the Chamber of Elements, the High Archivists continued their debates, trying to understand how a species so young and so fragile had produced something that would outlast the stars themselves. The classification tribunal lasted 7 years. Scholars came from every corner of the galaxy to participate. They traveled distances that would have taken normal ships to cross. They came because this was important. This was perhaps the most important classification decision the library had ever faced. Some argued that human tears were a form of crystallized consciousness, similar to the thought gems found in the outer spiral. These gems contained preserved memories from ancient beings, frozen in crystal for millions of years. But the thought gems were created deliberately, through careful ritual and sacrifice. Human tears were produced spontaneously, without any effort at all. Others proposed that tears were temporal artifacts. Perhaps humans, in their emotional intensity, were somehow reaching back through time and capturing fragments of lived experience. Perhaps the tears contain not just emotions but actual moments, preserved forever in liquid form. A faction of mystics declared that tears were the physical manifestation of souls. They were laughed out of the chamber by the more scientifically minded scholars. But then they returned with mathematical models that proved surprisingly accurate, and suddenly no one was laughing anymore. Doctor remained at the library through all of this. She had become something like an ambassador, though she preferred the term translator. She helped Keeper understand the context behind each sample. She explained the stories within the tears. This one, she would say, pointing to a sample that glowed with fierce crimson resonance, is from a woman who watched her village burn during a war. She lost everything, her family, her home, her entire way of life. The resonance suggests rage, observed, but there is something else underneath it, something harder to identify. That is defiance, Doctor explained. She did not let the destruction break her. She spent 40 years rebuilding what was lost. She started a school for orphans. She created a community where there had been only ashes. The tears are not just grief. They are a promise. A promise that destruction would not have the last word, that love would endure despite everything. Carefully noted this in the analysis records. Human tears, it seemed, were not just emotional snapshots. They were crystallized intention. They captured not just what humans felt, but what they chose to do with those feelings. And this one, they asked, indicating a sample that pulsed with soft gold light. Doctor smiled. A father holding his newborn son for the first time. He was crying because he had never known his own father. He grew up alone, without guidance, without love. And in that moment, holding his child, he was making a promise too. What promise? That he would be there for every moment, that his son would never feel the emptiness he had felt, that the cycle of abandonment would end with him. The patterns emerged slowly over the years of analysis. Human tears always contain transformation. Grief became purpose. Fear became courage. Love acknowledged death and declared itself anyway. High archivists spent much of the tribunal period in private meditation, considering the evidence. They were the oldest being in the library. They had seen civilizations rise and fall. They had watched stars born and die, but they had never seen anything like this. On the final day of the 7th year, rose before the assembled tribunal. The chamber was packed with scholars from 100 species. Holographic projections allowed billions more to watch from across the galaxy. Human tears are hereby classified as sacred cosmic elements, Category Prime, announced. The chamber erupted in noise. Some scholars cheered, others protested. Category Prime was the highest classification possible. It was reserved for fundamental building blocks of reality. Neutron star cores were Category Prime. Dark matter harmonics were Category Prime. To place human tears alongside such phenomena was unprecedented. Raised a hand for silence. They are not biological products, the ancient archivist continued. They are not energy formations. They are a new fundamental expression of existence, the only known substance that contains both matter and meaning as inseparable properties. This classification is too extreme, one scholar objected. Humans are barely 1,000 years old as a spacefaring species. They cannot possibly have produced something of Category Prime significance. Age is irrelevant, replied calmly. Truth does not care how old its source is, and the truth is undeniable. We have tested the samples in every way we know. We have applied every analysis method in our vast databases. The results are consistent and clear. But why? Another scholar demanded. Why are human tears different from all others? Turned to look at Doctor, who sat in the observation gallery with beside her. She had aged during the 7 years of the tribunal. Her hair was fully gray now. Lines had deepened on her face. But her eyes were still sharp, still curious. still full of a fierce love for life that seemed to define her species. "It is because humans are the only species we have encountered who are fully mortal," said. "They know they are mortal from the moment they can think. They understand that their time is limited, that everyone they love will eventually die, that nothing they build will last forever." The chamber was silent now. Every being present was listening intently. And yet they choose to love completely despite this knowledge. They give their hearts to beings they know they will lose. They build families and communities and civilizations, knowing that all of it is temporary. They do not hold back. They do not protect themselves. They love as if love could last forever, even though they know it cannot. Paused, letting the words settle. Every human tear is an act of defiance against entropy. It is the universe's only physical evidence that love matters more than physics. We do not merely classify these elements. We recognize them as proof that consciousness can create meaning that outlasts itself. In the gallery, Doctor wiped her eyes. The tears that fell were collected automatically by the small device she now wore. Every sample she provided was precious. She would have loved this, she whispered to Maya. She would have loved knowing that tears are just rocks, really, rocks with stories. The tear that fell from her cheek and landed on her hand contained, according to later analysis, the specific resonance of a mother's joy at imagining her daughter's wonder. It was added to the collection and labeled with her name and a single note. For Maya, who knew that everything has a story worth keeping. After the verdict was announced, the Universal Library opened a new wing. It was called the Hall of Human Tears. The samples were displayed in containment fields arranged in careful patterns, each one glowing with its own unique light. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see them. They stood in silence before the displays, reading the stories attached to each tier. A soldier who had lost his entire unit in battle and then devoted his life to preventing other wars. A woman who had been told she would never walk again and had climbed mountains in her wheelchair. A child who had been abandoned at birth and had grown up to create a home for other abandoned children. Each tier was a universe of meaning. Each tier was a promise that something mattered, that something would endure, that love was real and death was not the end. Became the curator of the hall. They had cosmic elements for 12,000 years, but they had never felt such purpose in their work. Every day, new samples arrived. Every day, they learned new stories. Doctor eventually returned to Earth. She was old now, and she wanted to spend her remaining time with her family. But before she left, she gave one final sample. "What emotion is this one?" asked, analyzing the tear. Doctor smiled. "Gratitude," she said. "For the library, for you, for the chance to understand what tears really are." She paused. "And hope. Hope that when I die, some part of me will remain. That the love I felt for Maya and for everyone else in my life will not disappear. That it will be here in this library forever." Carefully placed the sample in its containment field. It glowed with warm light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "It will be here," they promised, "for as long as existence exists." Doctor nodded, satisfied. She walked slowly toward the exit, pausing once to look back at the hall filled with glowing tears. Then she was gone. The Universal Library had countless wonders across countless. It had never before classified hope. But when the analysis automata processed the complete human tear collection and identified the common thread running through every sample, they found that hope was the only word that fit. Human tears were not made of salt and water and emotion. They were made of refusal. Refusal to let death have the last word. Refusal to let love disappear. Refusal to let meaning die with the mortal flesh that made it. And the universe, apparently, respected that refusal enough to make it permanent. In the Hall of Human Tears, the lights glowed eternally. Each one was a story. Each one was a promise. Each one was proof that the smallest, most fragile species in the galaxy had created something that would outlast the stars themselves. This was humanity's gift to the cosmos. Not technology or conquest or expansion. Just tears, just love, just the stubborn insistence that something mattered even in a universe that did not care. And in the end, that was enough to change everything.